you to know the history of the Maya. When Thoth, known as Ningishzidda, in Sumer, he was when Marduk had been...
Here reach Dr. Turing, please, at the sound of the tone, leave me a message and make it a beautiful day.
At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang.
Okay, we're hanging up on Dr. Turing. Dr. Turing, in case you get this message, we're calling you from our Revolution Radio Sacred Matrix show. This is Janet Care Lessin. Please, you hung up. Okay, back to Dr. Lessin.
Okay, yeah, I was interviewing Dr. Sasha Lessin, a student of Zecharia Sitchin, on who exactly the Maya were and how did they get there. And the story goes back to an ancient murder of one brother by another. This is what drove all this information. The head of Egypt was a guy named Marduk, who in Egypt was called Ra. But Marduk's younger brother, Dumuzi, was starting to make an alliance with the other side, the lineage that was opposed to Marduk, namely Yahweh Enlil's lineage. And so Marduk got his sister, Justiniana, to have sex with Dumuzi, and then yell rape. And Marduk sent his goons out to get Dumuzi and put him in exile, was his idea, he said, so that he wouldn't have a rival. However, Dumuzi tried to escape, and he fell into Lake Victoria and drowned. And so he was, everyone wanted to kill him, but his grandfather, who was the king of Nibiru, said, "You'd better not kill my son. I'll just exile him to North America, to Ohio or someplace like that, the land of horned beasts. And I'm going to give Egypt to Ningishzidda, who was then known as Thoth." Well, by and by, Anu forgave his grandson, Marduk, and Marduk was allowed to return to Egypt. But there in Egypt, he found Thoth. Ningishzidda was ruling, but they fought for 300 years. Finally, Marduk's dad, who's also the dad of Ningishzidda, said, "Hey, look, son, Marduk, enough of this. Let's just knock it off. Hey, Thoth, come with me. Let's build Stonehenge, and after that, we'll in Britain, and after that, we'll build Newgrange in Ireland, and then I want you to help with your uncle's project. You've been there before, on top of the Andes by Lake Titicaca, a place called Tiuhuanacu, where we have that other big spaceport, and bring some of these descendants of Cain with you." They call them Indians, of all things, in South America, but we know they're just descendants of Cain. So Ningishzidda goes on over, and he starts prospecting. First he goes to Tiuhuanacu, and then he goes to the Valley of Mexico, to the site we call Teotihuacan, and he finds lots of gold. And not only gold, he finds copper too. He says, "Hey, wow, this is cool." And he goes back, gets a bunch of his Semitic, Middle Eastern guys with beards, and a bunch of his West African administrators. He liked to work with West Africans. He had a place down in Zimbabwe with his dad, and the West Africans were his administrators and his technicians, and they all went and they built this wonderful place at Teotihuacan, and that was the beginning of it. And the area they spread out in the New World. Ningishzidda came to be known as Kukuklan, or also Quetzlcoatl, and they spread out. Especially they like the Yucatan Peninsula, down there in the lower part of Mexico and Honduras and El Salvador, and they had high civilization, really amazing. The mathematics they had in Palenque, one of the places in Yucatan. They were actually taught to be sky-faring people. Interesting, the way they depict Kukuklan or Thoth is they show him coming out of a serpent. They thought of their planes as serpents, and then so Kukuklan educated the Mayans and taught them advanced mathematics, and they settled all the way down through South America, all the way to the west coast of Peru and up the mountains of the west coast of Peru in a place called Chavin. So this was all Mayans. It was raised, get this, the rulers of Mexico, Central America, and Western Peru were black people. And that's what our research shows us. They were mixed. There were Semitic people, guys with beards from the Near East, and there were the so-called Indians, which are really just the South American Indians, which are really other Native Americans. We'll come to those later. But in any case, the Maya had this extensive area. Well, the Indians, first the Tolans came. They were peaceful, and they worked at menial jobs. They were, kind of like the Mexicans that first came across to California when California was highly urbanized. But after a while, most of the Maya decided to leave. They just picked up and left the place at Teotihuacan to the Tolans. But then the Tolans, after a few hundred years, moved down to the Yucatan Peninsula too, and basically other people came in from the north. They're probably allies of Marduk, of the Aztecs, that came in and filled the Valley of Mexico. Anyway, the Aztecs and the Indians that were in rebellion kept pushing on the Mayan people, and they kept retreating further and further south. You can see all bodies that they lost. And they had their final battle at Chavin, and what happened in Chavin is that's where they ran into Uncle Adad, who is running the Yahweh station up in Tiuhuanacu, and he and his men just killed everybody in Chavin. That was the end of the Mayan civilization. That's a brief history. The Mayans had some very interesting practices. What happened is, before Thoth left, he said he's going back to Nibiru. He took a bunch of 12-year-olds and he trained them in all the arts and sciences and so forth. And they were supposed to be the priests and lead the Mayan people into all kinds of beautiful meditative and mathematical and especially astronomical things. And some of them even were running space vehicles. However, through the generations, they started using their powers. The priesthood started killing their enemies, and then they started getting captives, and they started being just as bloody as the Aztecs that were coming down from the north. And this is the same kind of process that happened when the Marduk's Mycenaean people overran the Minoan, the goddess people, and in other words, any of the goddess people that survived had to become just as brutal and warlike as the invaders. So anyway, that's a little bit of a the Mayans had some really ugly practices. They used to throw virgins in their pools as an offering, and this thing about when they did a sacrifice, they cut out the heart, and they were saying, "Please come back, Thoth." That was after we left in 311 CE. Please come back. Here's a heart for you. It was the very bizarre Valentine's Day that the Mayans had. And so they too became very blood-like. Janet looks like she's going to say it.
Oh, I just want to ask you a couple of questions, but I'll just slow it down a little bit. So what time period are we looking at? Come closer to the mic, please. Do you have an approximation? You don't have to have exact. Is this...
Right now, I'm the Thoth arrived in 311 BCE. He left about 311 CE, and he just returned a few years back to help with the Age of Aquarius.
So I guess I'm looking at the approximation of. So the Anunnaki came here 450,000 years ago, and then they created humanity around what?
The first Adam was created about 200,000 years ago, and then from the first Adamites is where you get most of the population of Africa, and it was the Adapites, the ones that were created 300,000 years ago or so, that mainly settled the Mesopotamian area and married the astronauts, the Nibiru astronauts, and became the Ijiji, the giants of Canaan.
So this, when they came over to the Americas, and they founded the, where did they land first? Was that in the Americas? This one here.
They landed at atop the Andes near a great big lake known as Lake Titicaca. And they started first, Ninurta came, and then Thoth came to help him. And the idea was Marduk and his son were closing in, his son's Nabu, on the spaceport. Yahweh had a spaceport on the Sinai Peninsula. And Marduk now had taken over Egypt again. He was coming with his armies up Egypt toward Canaan. And from Egypt and from Canaan, Nabu was coming. He got Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities to be friendly toward him. And they were converging on the spaceport in the Sinai. And so what happened is Yahweh sent his Ninurta and Nergal to bomb Sodom and Gomorrah in the south end of the Salt Sea, which became the Dead Sea. And the spaceport, and Yahweh had anticipated that. That's why he made that other spaceport on top of the Andes. And the takeoff was Nazca, and the gate to Tiuhuanacu spaceport was Pumapu. So that was the first one. And what they brought there was lots of these Cain descendants. That was the so-called South American Indians. Okay, then later, after Noah's flood, which was 13,000 years ago, the Indians survived. They went on these lakes in the middle of Lake Titicaca, so they were still there. And then the Anunnaki were able to rebuild, and they found, as a result of the flood, all kinds of placer gold, raw exposed copper, and they built this whole great big mining complex all throughout the Andes. And then when Thoth joined them, Ningishzidda joined them and found gold in the Valley of Mexico, that was just an extension of what they'd been doing. It was really Chauvin, which I intensely studied. They diverted two rivers and they made them run right through so they could wash gold. In Teotihuacan, the whole place had a 5-mile-long sluice thing where they would run water down and get the placer gold and make all kinds of water. It was a whole huge mining operation, and it was, again, this was a high civilization run mainly by black people, and I know the Mexicans don't like to hear that, but that's the way it is, according to the works that we have from the Anunnaki.
Right. So you've been writing a book on the various religions around the planet and how they were created, and was it all from one god, or different gods established their different religions? You kind of give us some backstory on various religion types and.
Okay, let's start with the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki didn't think they were gods. These were just big people, like us, only a little bit bigger, in 4 feet or so bigger. And they, when they were uptight and they couldn't solve it by science, they prayed to the creator of all. And their concept of the creator of all was sort of anthropomorphic. There's this whole thing about the queen at one point saying, "Oh, don't do science, pray instead," and so pray to the creator. So they personified the creator too, the way a lot of religions on Earth do. But when they got to running lots of humans, they were called lords, El, and they were seen as they had great powers, they had great weapons. What the Bible calls angels were these ambassadors, the high-ranking Anunnaki that had all kinds of weapons, and they just blast people. They had trouble with them. And they were scary people. When a couple of them came to see whether there were any people that were still in Yahweh in Sodom, the whole population started storming the house of Lot where they were staying. This is their chance to get rid of these dangerous people that just keep killing people and stuff. And so they were not popular in Canaan, partly because the people that settled Canaan knew the history a lot better than people elsewhere because of the astronauts who had settled along the coast there. Goliath was one of them, for example, the Philistines. And so what we have then is the Anunnaki, basically what they wound up doing is they wound up after Noah's flood, ruling most of the earth, at least the Near East, through the sons of Noah. And they sort of retired to a temple. And what they meant by a temple, that was a place where they kept their planes and their boats if they were on a coast. And they let the human kings rule in their behalf. And what happened in the original sort of ritual is people brought them their dinners and cleaned their house and carried them around and so forth. And those things became religious rituals later on when the priesthoods took over. That was really just a bunch of rituals like this of how you take care of the lords. And then the lords became to accept the title. Okay, you want to call us gods? Like, all right, we'll be gods. And they did terrible things, like, bombing whole cities and making people fight against each other, and making sure Marduk was on the human earthling side quite a bit. And he wanted to unify them and drive the Anunnaki off and go back to Nibiru and take over Nibiru. But in any case, Yahweh said, no, you can't even use the same script. You better not speak the same languages and fight each other and have your armies fight each other. And just so they'll never realize there's only 1,000 of us and there's hundreds of thousands of them. So that was part of the background of these so-called gods. And so that now you get these different areas saying, I'm the god of this place. You go attack these people. They have a false god. And a false god or a sinner who just meant the other side. So they were attacking each other. And there's some direct spin-offs from this. We call it Dominator Consciousness. It goes like this. In Anunnaki religions, there's the god on top. And then these are not gods. These are people. But anyway, God's on top. And the god is punishing and mean. And he ain't a good guy. And you better do what he says or he'll kill you, and he'll kill your kids, and he'll, indiscriminately wipe out your whole city just because he doesn't like your leaders. Sounds like something that we still have. Yes, we do still have Dominator Consciousness. And so, however, amidst all this, there was this incredible woman. Her name was Ninmah, the Great Mother. And she kept her feuding brothers who just, used armies against each other, and her nephew, she kept breaking up their fights. She would cause truces and peace to happen and so forth. And so after, what happened was when Yahweh ordered the bombing of the spaceport and the Sinai and Sodom and Gomorrah and Zoar, the radioactive cloud from these bombings blew all over Sumer and killed everybody, or Iraq, and killed everybody there too, except for Marduk's people and Yahweh and little Lucifer's people, because they had fallout shelters and they were far enough north. And so that Marduk then was the Lord of the whole earth for quite some time, except that Ninmah was able to establish her own area of dominance, which was in Anatolia or Turkey. And this was the area known as the area of the great goddess. In Ninmah's area, the religion was something very different. It was a oneness, a partnership with Mother Nature and with men and women being equal. There was no walled cities. There was no armor. There was no slavery like all the other Anunnaki cities. Everybody was a slave to the people above them, and everybody was conscripted. That's the worst kind of slavery. And but in Ninmah's place, there wasn't any slaves, and women and men were equal. The women had very high ceremonial positions and so forth. And so this was, and meanwhile, Marduk is known in more eastern part of Europe and then all over Europe as Zeus. And he and his people, like Alexander the Great, one of his sons, start conquering everything. But the last of the goddess culture places where you have this equality, where it really was working, was the Minos and on Crete. And they had their capital in Knossos. And what the Minos, the king of Crete, did is he got all the Mycenaeans, that's Zeus's people who are coming down the Greek peninsula, to give their princes and princesses to him as hostages or guests. And they practiced with these bulls that they raised from childhood, and they had these teams of pole vaulters, two guys and a girl and a bull usually, and they entertained and so forth.
What did they practice with the bulls?
It's called bull vaulting, where acrobatics on a bull, just like you would do on a horse, where this is a tame bull, where they would do somersaults over the bull, grab the bull by the horns, so to speak, and do a somersault onto his back. All those kind of acrobatic things.
Like the early rodeos, instead of horses.
Yeah.
Well, they have bulls in modern rodeos.
Yeah, well, this is something different. These are treasured animals that are not mistreated.
Right.
They grow up with the kids, and they know that they're more than that. They're trained bulls. So, but anyway, one of the hostages, Theseus, who was from Thebes, Theseus had an affair with the high priestess of Crete. Her name was Ariadne. And about this time, what happened is there was this great big, something astronomical disturbance. We're not sure what it was, but it caused all kinds of disturbances on Earth, including the eruption of Thera, which we know in modern days as Stromboli. And Stromboli exploded just when the Minoan fleet was all anchored for a big powwow at Knossos in Crete. And it sent these huge waves that sunk the fleet, and the waves went the other way. And that's what caused this was in 1495 or so. BCE, and those are the waves that caused all the havoc in Egypt that made Moses and the Egyptian and Israelites flee Egypt. But that was the same disturbance. But that was the end of the Minoan fleet. And what Ariadne and Theseus did is they led a slave revolt, and they took over. And now there was no more goddess culture in Crete. Theseus just dropped Ariadne off on the Isle of Lesbos with her girls and sailed back to do more wars, which ultimately led to Alexander the Great conquering everything in the world.
So, and Alexander the Great
was the son of Ra, Marduk, Zeus.
Okay. And so he found his father when Alexander the Great went to Alexandria. He found his father in the glass chamber or something.
No, that isn't exactly.
Explain to me what happened there. Yes.
Okay, well, Alexander's men would, when they got to the he conquered most of Asia. I think it was when he wanted to cross the Ganges. They said, no, we want to go back. We've had enough conquering and raping and killing, and we want to settle down after all. How many people can you kill and rape? And so they headed back, and everyone gave up. And here comes Marduk to Babylon. Hell, we're not going to fight this guy. He always wins. And so wherever he went, they started surrendering to him and so forth. As soon as he got to Egypt, he left his men and rode very fast with just a few guys all the way to Siwa, way down in the south, and where there was a temple and this in this temple, that's where you're supposed to be able to talk to Marduk himself, to Zeus. And so before Alexander ever started out, he had so much problems about who his father was, because his mom said, hey, kid, Philip ain't your dad. Your real dad is really God, is Zeus. And so before Alexander even set off on his great big world conquest thing, he went to the oracle at Delphi, and he held a knife to her throat and said, am I or am I not Zeus's son? She said, oh, yeah, you're his son, for sure. And so the same thing happened when he went to Ziwa. What happened, he thought he was talking to the spirit of Marduk. We know now that there was a priest in this hidden chamber saying, yes, you're the son of Zeus, my son. But in any case, it depends on how you look at it. Maybe Marduk was possessing him or something. But anyway, Alexander firmly believed that Marduk was his father. And then later on, I forget who it was, saw Marduk's body floating in oil in Babylon. I think it's after Cyrus the Great came into Babylon. But they have ways of reviving a person who was probably just in suspended action, because he sure came back with a vengeance after that.
Right. Well, the Anunnaki don't stay dead. They have stories of them being revived all throughout their history. So they have the ability to raise the dead. And then that ties in with the biblical stories of Jesus being able to raise the dead. And Jesus was probably either another name for Enki, or he was somehow one of the children of one of the Anunnaki. Probably if he was one of the children, he was Enki's son, or Zeus, or somebody's son. Anyway, back to you, Sasha. You're doing such a great job. Go ahead. Forgot where you were.
Yeah, I did. Let me just regather.
Okay.
I was on a roll And so there was, from time to time, there were people that broke away totally from the Dominator Consciousness religions. But the Dominator Consciousness religions followed Aryans, who were the people that were following Inanna and Marduk, and everywhere they went, they brought this Dominator Consciousness. And so after Crete fell, there wasn't anything left hardly at all. Dominator Consciousness people took over India. Dominator Consciousness people, a Hindu place, and in Assam, far north of India, there was this prince. His name was Siddhartha. You probably heard of him. And he joined a bunch of meditators, and he realized, oh my gosh, this is dumb. There ain't no gods. You don't need to do all this prayer stuff. This is nonsense. Just all you got to do is meditate, and you can have your own spiritual experience. You don't need no priests. And he basically 400 years before Jesus said the same thing. Get rid of this authoritarian stuff where there's somebody always higher and men always dominate and women are inferior, and especially get rid of the caste system where people are born into and can never rise in their comfort level or prestige. This sucks. Everybody's equal and every soul is important. And basically, we have the Buddha and then Jesus saying that the exact same thing, saying, stop this stuff. The other trick that the Anunnaki liked was credit. We don't always have to fight wars, what Nanar, that became Allah, said. All you got to do is get people to owe each other money and engage in trade. That it's to their mutual interest, not to war. At one point, Yahweh was getting, and Marduk, they were having their wars, and Marduk was getting more and more powerful, so that Nanar, who's known as Sin, the man of the Arabian Peninsula, he became Allah, sent one of his ambassadors, Gabriel, to choke this warlord who was meditating in a cave. Listen up, you better learn all this stuff, all these Bible verses. I don't know anything. I'll teach them to you. Learn them quick. And so anyway, so that was how Muhammad started. And so Muhammad, with the help of Allah, with Nanar, killed off all the Jews he could find, killed lots and lots and lots of people. And then his Ali, his number one guy, wouldn't leave him while he was dying. He was dying being poisoned by an Israeli woman who'd been raped and seen her children and her husband killed before her eyes. And so she poisoned Muhammad and a couple of his guys. The other guys died, but Muhammad was dying slowly, and Ali wouldn't leave him. In the meantime, the others in the top circle had a meeting, and they chose somebody else, and that was the beginning of the Shia-Sunni war that's going on till these days. But he was just another one of those gods. And then later on, promoted Nanar to be king of Nibiru, and he abdicated. And the Galzu came back, the higher people from the Federation, and said, you got to knock off all this stuff. I want you all to work on peace on Earth before it's too late. They're just about to destroy the place, but I'm sending you all back, and I want you to, it's Enki's turn to have his age, Aquarius, and I want you all to help, all of you. Got it? Yes, sir.
So, I don't have a question. You want to continue? Okay.
Okay. So. Oh, what's that one?
You're going over my foot. Okay, keep going. Come on. Here. Go ahead. Don't stop.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It was an accident. We're worried. Sorry about that.
Okay. So let me just think for a minute, please. Okay. There were a lot of spin-offs, religions from the original Anunnaki religion, and they kept on creating more and more of them. One of the first ones, and some of them were great improvements, like Baha'i was much more gentle. God wasn't as punitive and so forth. But they were still hierarchic and still have that kind of a problem. There wasn't very many egalitarian movements. A modern movement that was, purely in the same pattern the Anunnaki always do, was Mormon, where an angel, Moroni, comes and comes to Joseph Smith and turns him on to another one of these Anunnaki religions. But it's more of the same hierarchy. Some people are above others, and you obey who's above you, and this whole system, which involves hierarchy, where the rulers will kill to rule if they have to. They might do it just for fun sometimes too, where men dominate women, where the winners boss the losers, and the winners take more and more, and the losers get less and less. That's the way governance under the Anunnaki pattern, the Babylonian consciousness, as it were, exists.
Right, and they always have an intermediary. Like you can't really have the information from God. Even in the Mormon Church, they have their. I'm not a Mormon, but they have their. What do you call it? The not psychics, say prophets. They have prophets, and only the prophets get the information, and they interpret what the information is for their church members, and so that's the difference between other types of religion where they're teaching that we have a direct connection to the source. And what are some of those religions?
Well, what I'd like to say about those religions, particularly since I am a professional anthropologist, is that many people that Westerners tend to dismiss as being inferior because they don't have as great a technological society as we do, have direct access to source. And they use entheogens. The Anunnaki used entheogens too. Nimrod brought over all kinds of brought marijuana and DMT-bearing plants and all kinds of great psychedelics, mushrooms, and wine. They made beer, and they were really into partying and having sex with everybody. But in any case, that's. I don't know. I'm somehow diverted myself. Oh yeah. So in every society, people, whatever their means, sometimes it's ipoga, where they blow it up their nose. Sometimes it's with ibogaine in West Africa. But people use psychedelics or meditating or staying all night for several nights alone on top of the mountain, or meditating in some form. All kinds of ways of having direct spiritual experiences. And in the LSD therapy that I've done, a lot of entheogenic facilitation, many people have direct spiritual experiences, and there ain't no priests there. They have the experience directly, and that's exactly the point, that you can feel your oneness with the universe. What people mean by spiritual experience in simple English is ecstasy and joy and oneness with everybody. And if you've ever been in a space with holotropic breath work, which does the same thing as meditation, really good meditation, a thrill. Sometimes it happens spontaneously while you're giving birth to a baby or winning a marathon or something. But no matter what it is, there's ways that people can have that direct feeling of oneness with and love for everybody and everything. And that's what people mean when they say they're one with God, or they have. And one of the interesting things is that a person who knows how to center himself doesn't, just because they have a spiritual experience, neglect the everyday experience. A mature person learns to center him or herself between the spiritual and the mundane, between the proud and the humble, to realize that everything is in all of us, and to not identify with one side and push the other side into the shadow. And what happens in religions that push half of humanity as sinned, or either potentially you got to kill them or convert them, or don't realize that that's nonsense. Those people just represent your own disowned cultural or individual personality parts, and you need to be able to embrace everything. You look, this is a holographic universe, and everything and everyone in the universe has a resonance within everything and everyone in the universe, and the universe has each of us in it. So that's why we can empathize with everybody and everything. That's what happens when you meditate, do an entheogen under the proper circumstances, or free yourself from Dominator Consciousness and the Anunnaki religions.
Right. So it seems that the religions were put in place, the original religions, which have become the main religions of the earth, were put into place as a control mechanism to control the information flow to humanity, to keep them from reconnecting with source and realizing their universal oneness and connection to the divine. And because there were so few Anunnaki and so many humans. But do you have any idea with your research? Because I haven't read your book yet. You're still writing it. Dr. Lessin's writing a new book going into more depth around the religions of the planet and how they sprung from the Anunnaki and tracing them all back to the Anunnaki. It seemed like periodically they would introduce another religion in order to further divide and conquer and confuse humanity. What do you decide?
I think that's right, and even the really, like Buddhism. Most Buddhists really understand Buddhist principles, and some of the wonderful things that he said. Like, basically, it comes down to, if you enjoy what you've got and don't sweat what you've not, then you're okay. You don't need to make yourself suffer. Suffering is due to addiction, he said. That is attachment to what you don't have, or attachment to avoiding what you don't want to deal with. And all you have to do is give up your attachments and appreciate the possibilities of enjoying the here and now, and you're in nirvana, or you've attained enlightenment. And it's just a matter of remembering and forgetting, and remembering and forgetting. That's what we all do until we remember that love is the way that we connect with everyone. We can empathize with everyone. That's the essence of Buddhism. And those Buddhists tend to do that. However, when you get monasteries, they get back on this authoritarian trip, whether it's in some monasteries of every kind. And it goes the other way around too. In some authoritarian places, when you get a group of intelligent people together and they meditate together, they soon transcend whatever the dogma of their religion is, and they feel the reality of the coherent field that they form with their fellow meditators, and they have direct spiritual experiences. But they don't bother the lay people that are giving money that's paying for their room and board.
Great. So what... and we have about 10, 12 minutes or something 15 minutes before the top of the hour. Can you kind of give us the major religions? Like, which one came first? Do you have any idea which religion came first?
The first religion was the temple rituals in the Sumerian temples. That was the first one. That's what they all came from. And then
were they the Nile? There's a bunch of temples that were down the Nile.
The Nile isn't the Nile's in Egypt. No, the Nile is in Egypt.
Right. Yes.
And so this is much later. That's when Marduk Ra got his thing going, and he. What happened is that the people saw after Marduk got Dumuzi killed, she kept his body. Gibel, his brother, fished the body out of Lake Victoria, and she had it embalmed. And she said, "I'm going to send his body back to Nibiru. They can revive it." And everybody got so excited about that. And Marduk said, "I'll tell that same thing to my pharaohs. If they're good pharaohs and do everything I say, you get to go back to Nibiru, and I'll be there too. And because I'm going to take over Nibiru too. I'm the rightful king of Nibiru. I was cheated out of it, but I'm going to get back there. But anyway, you're going to get back there." And so just do what I say exactly, and then after you die, you'll go back to Nibiru, go to heaven, go back to Nibiru too, and heaven or sky is what they really meant in the first place. And so that Egyptian religion took on this whole character, and then you have all these religions that are spin-offs. The most immediate one is Ahura Mazda. Nabu, the son of Marduk, goes to Persia, and he starts preaching, the Savior's coming, the Savior's coming. He met his dad, Marduk is coming. They drove Zarathustra, or Nabu, out finally. But eventually, Persia goes over to Mardukian religion, the Zoroastrianism. But then, of course, Alexander conquered Persia.
So the Savior that they were, is that the same as a Messiah? Is that how the concept of the Messiah originated?
That's right. But you ask any. I'm Jewish. You ask any Jewish woman what she thinks about her newborn first son, and she'll say, "He's here, the Savior. My son's going to be a doctor and find a cure for cancer," or whatever.
Right.
So that every mother thinks her first child in my subculture is the Savior.
So that's the Messiah concept. Okay, so the first.
What it comes down to, once you understand psychology, as I do, is we all have the Savior archetype within us. We're the ones that can save ourselves. No one else is going to do it for you.
Right. So when we empower ourselves and realize we're the ones that can do it and are doing it, instead of being in victim mode, where everything's done to us, and we're, if we get past the hierarchical thinking, we can empower ourselves and be effective in the world. But as long as there's always somebody going to do it to us, and so it's a spiritual concept as well as a physical reality that we create together.
Yeah, but it's once you have reached the place in life that I have, you realize that there's nothing you get nothing out of making anybody else wrong. If they have treasured beliefs that work for them, that's groovy, and just dig it, and so that there's no need to infringe on anybody. Laissez-faire, laissez-passe,
So the original first religions were in Sumer. So that's the ziggurats. The temples were.
No, those weren't religions. All the ziggurats was where the guys lived, where they kept their airplanes, where they kept their communication tower, and where the servants, that is the Adamites, the Adapite earthlings, came to serve them, and took them out for walks and carried them on a litter and stuff. The people might have thought they were holy, but they knew they weren't. So that's how it started. And then they get this priesthood that starts doing it, and Ninurta and Adad Marduk are busy guys. These are all geniuses that are building pyramids, which are communication systems and all kinds of energy systems all over the globe. And they let these priests run things for them. And the priests of Marduk, particularly, the priests of Ra, just kept on. They're just really a powerful force.
So the priests were the hybrids. So,
yes.
And we're all hybrids, but what we mean by they're the bloodline that became the priests and kings. And it started with the priesthoods, right?
It's even more than that. It wasn't just even the bloodline. The pharaohs, when Yahweh was in charge of Egypt, they used to suckle at Nimrod's breast, too. That was part of the ritual, too.
And what was the reason behind suckling on Nimrod's? And Nimrod was the birth mother goddess that was a co-creator of
that means humanity. She blessed them. She blessed them with her essence, so that they could be peaceful and feel some kind of partnership with other people. She was so different from these warlike dudes around her. She was Enki was playful and full of heart too, but she was way more empathetic than Enki was. Enki and she had a lot of kids together, but he kept having sex with his daughters, and then his daughters' daughters, and his daughters' daughters, and she got pretty fed up with it after a while. Not about the sex part, but the fact that they fell in love with him, and then he was really just in love with her, and he didn't stick with them.
Right, so he abandoned her children, and they were looking for romantic love. So that's interesting. I have to decline this. That's an interesting concept, is that they had romantic love and they could fall in love. So they're very, very human in that way. And then there was the expectation of pair bonding. While they were not a monogamous species, it was very common. And part of that is probably because their gene pool was so small, because there was only about 1,000 Anunnaki. So in order to have hybrid vigor, any species needs to diversify their couplings and have children, cross-pollinate and have children with different mixes of DNA. I mean, you couldn't have, like we see that in dogs when they become too inbred, they have defects, right? Am I off?
I think you're reading others with some of your own values. I think that the Anunnaki made a distinction between making a baby and having sex.
Right.
That you perhaps you're not making. For example, Thoth was lovers with Inanna and her twin brother Utu, it's like that's different than when you're deliberately making a baby. These people, baby was a big deal to them.
Right. So they had the breeding program where we wanted to. Was that a decision they made individually, or was that like Inanna was trained to make love with her grandfather, great-grandfather?
Great-grandfather.
Anu, but so she was taught the tantric arts so she could be a good lover. But what I'm confused about, did they intend for her to have a child by Anu, or have to do?
No, they know how to control his birth. They are a technologically advanced society. Anu was not going to have a kid with Inanna. She was there for sexual pleasure whenever he came to her.
Okay, that was so. Did they have, from your research, did they have any system around choosing who would make love with? I mean, because I know that what's his name? Enlil raped Sut. So that was a rape. So that was not.
Yeah, you had to have consent. That was absolutely a deal. For example, in the sort of build up, the background to the murder of Dumuzi, Marduk was declaring his allegiance with the Earthlings. He was marrying the daughter of Lucifer's overseer, and Kimi was the guy's name, and the daughter was Sarpanit. She was an Earthling, a hybrid Earthling. He was declaring his allegiance, and Marduk had been head of a Mars base for a while, and so all guys from Mars base, the Anunnaki from Mars base. They were known as the Ijiji. I know there's a biblical term for them. I can't remember what it is.
Nephilim?
The Nephilim, yeah. So they came down for his wedding, and Anu said, "Yeah, you can marry an Earthling. This is the king of Nibiru, but you can never, and your kids can never, and Sarpana can never come to Nibiru. You're banned for it, but you can go ahead and marry her, and then you got to go off to Egypt afterwards." And Marduk said, "Okay, I'll start with that." And so here's this big wedding. And all the Ijiji, all the astronauts are there, and all these beautiful serving girls, the best they had. And they made a secret deal, I got to tell you. But anyway, Marduk and Sarpana fly off to their honeymoon in Sinai. And the Ijiji and the 200 of these beautiful Adapite women run off, and they got all the arms. They take over the landing platform at Baalbek. They aim their artillery at all the other sites, and they say to Yahweh, to Enlil, recognize our marriages. We're tired of not enough beer and no girls at all. We're gonna move to Earth, and we're gonna live here, and we want you to recognize our marriages, or we'll blow you to bits. And Marduk said, "Hey, Uncle Enlil, you better do it." And so Yahweh Enlil said, okay, you can marry him, and you can breed kids with them. Go settle. Canaan's a good place. Go settle there. And so that's some of the backstory of how these great big humans wound up settling the Canaan area. Goliath was one of them. It's interesting. One of the daughters of Enki and Nimma was a woman named Ninsun, and she was the mother of Gilgamesh, very, very famous king of Uruk.
It's interesting you mentioned Goliath. I'll ask you more about that later. But coming up, we have 2 minutes before the break. And so then they also had arranged marriages, and that's what still happens through the modern age with the royals. We've been watching like Victoria, and she was only allowed to select from a very small group of potential suitors. And so she ended up back in even as late as the 1800s, they marrying their siblings, or their cousins. They could even be first cousins, not second and third cousins. So back when at the beginning of the story, the Anunnaki, Enki had an arranged marriage. Tell us a little bit more about that, and then we have about 2 minutes. Oh,
yeah, that was a high dynastic marriage. What happened was the king of Nibiru, Lama, way back, 500,000 years ago, was faced with the dilemma of there was a big hole in their ozone because they had a thermonuclear war, and they were thinking, how can we stop this? His scientists said you can nuke the volcanoes, and that the ash might plug up the hole, or you can get a bunch of gold and turn it to floating powder of white atomic gold, and that might work. And Lama's wife said, "No, don't do that. Just pray. I already told you that." But in any case, one of the princes, Alalu, got sick of that. He led the other princes, and they crashed the gate. And Alalu chased Lama up to the top turret, and he threw him off the turret. And he said, "I'm king now." That's when Anu stepped forward and said, "No, you're not. I'm supposed to be next after Lama is no longer king." And Alalu said, "Look, let's not have any more civil war. I'll make you my number two, my cupbearer, so I can keep you near. And I'll be king. Your son, Enki, I know he's engaged to Nimma, but I instead break that engagement and have Enki marry my daughter, Damkina, and their kid, whoever it is, will be king after I, Alalu, am no longer king." Well, when he died...
Great. So back in about 5 minutes. Aloha, welcome back to Sacred Matrix. I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin, and our producer is Thomas Becker, a mad painter. getting a little bit of feedback here. Hopefully it'll clear out in a moment. This is radio, so and we are back. Before we get back to our show, we were talking about the Anunnaki, the first half of the show. Now we're going to tie it in with the modern era. And so, information prepared. But please do go over to the donation button on revolution.radio and make your donation, because we really need your donations. Now, I think there's a Patreon link at the top of the website. You can go click that, and maybe you want to become a regular donator. And then there's also a place at the bottom of the where you can mail your check. That's stay there. Okay, not sure what I can do.
Now, even though our producer really loves peanut butter sandwiches, don't send him any.
No, they won't try sending peanut butter sandwiches through the mail. What can I do? Is there anything I can do to make things better? Any suggestions?
Your speakers need to be turned down a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe join.
I've turned the speakers down a little bit. Does that help? I can turn it down even more.
Still static.
Okay, let me, maybe it's because I have this other phone here. Turn that down. There we go. That might help it.
I still hear static.
There we go. Everything else is turned down. I'll turn off the fan. Did that help? There we go. Something helped. Okay. So, let's tie up. So at the end of the first half, we were talking about the various religions, the history of the Anunnaki. And so, can you give me a little transition here, what we're going to do here? We're going to go over this book called...
Okay, so what happens is the Anunnaki the transition is that basically after the nuking of Sodom, Gomorrah, Zoar, and the spaceport, most of the Anunnaki left, and they left the Earth mostly to Marduk, or Zeus. But other Anunnaki stayed and contested Marduk, namely Nanar, or Allah. And they each had agents, and they were fighting each other and so forth. And finally, Anu said, "Look, let's have peace. We got to do something about Earth." And so he called everybody back, and he even let Marduk and his 200 followers come back to Nibiru. And the idea was he wanted to make Thoth into the new king of Nibiru. But Thoth said, "I don't want to be king. For heaven's sakes, I'm a scientist. I don't want to do that stuff. Why don't you give the job to Nanar? He likes power, Allah." And so that's what happened. So Marduk came, and he expected, "Look, I wanted you to make me king next." That's before Anu had made his announcement, and Anu had already given all these great jobs to everybody else so that they were on his side. So Enki was made in charge of the quantum computer. Enlil, or Yahweh, was given the treasury. He had all the gold. Incidentally, Enki is Lucifer, okay? And so all these jobs were given to different people. They were all against Marduk, and so Marduk said, "Wow, either make me king or I don't want to be part of this." And so they said, "Well, go back to Earth." And so they did. Marduk went back to Earth. He had his guys take charge of all the major corporations and everything, and nations, and pit them all against each other and act like they were separate, but he was really doing the strings on top, just like things go nowadays. And his agents, not all of them even knew who was on top of the whole pyramid, but on top of the whole pyramid is Marduk. But lately, to catch you up, he's gone over. But before that, they had instituted all these governments.
What do you mean he's gone over?
I mean that he has been ordered by, on pain of extinction, to work for world peace he says he's really glad that that's what he's been ordered to do, because he had to cause us the suffering he caused us, because that was part of the plan to bring us to a technological singularity where we could have artificial intelligence that would show us how to preserve the resources and stop killing each other and have a planet of peace. And now that that's achieved, it's no longer necessary to make us suffer, so Marduk says, and he feels truly remorseful and wants to make amends. And the Galactic Council said, okay, we're going to send an assassin along with you to see that you do it. He'll always have you in sight, but go ahead. You're very powerful and you're one of the most intelligent beings we know. You work with the team of Thoth and Jesus and Lucifer and everybody, and see if you can save this planet. And meanwhile, he has to deal with a situation that he put in a place, which is governments whose function is to steal. The governments of Earth, most of them, steal property, money, life, and the environment from people. They're built in by using what's called the common beneficent narrative, which is the lie that the government's working for you, but it's really stealing more and more and more of your resources and more resources of the planet, and it's dooming us if we keep on this dominator consciousness to do us all in. And the alternative is Nimma's partnership consciousness, where we feel each other in our hearts, and we help each other, and we realize we're all kin.
Right. So Nimba's concept, the divine feminine, the goddess culture, wants to create a partnership society. Right now we have dominator consciousness, we have patriarchy. So she wants to bring us into balance, just like you have a loving relationship, a loving partnership, a balancing of the masculine and feminine, that we are equal. And most of the original religions have perpetuated to this day that men are superior and that children are property of parents. And that's a real problem here, because all beings are equal, all are sovereign. And so when we get into balance on this planet, we will finally balance this planet. Stop having perpetual war and the environment. So we're going to go next into this book called The Joys of Psychopathocracy. And is there a definition of the term psychopathocracy?
Yeah, I just told you what it was.
Repeat that, please.
It's the system whereby governments steal property and life and resources from the people, where all the major, where, for example, the medical profession and the insurance profession take more and more resources and leave and make sure that you don't really get cures, but you always get huge grants for what's going to happen when the cure is there. If you give us more money to keep doing research, and more money for arms and all the kinds of things that are to basically take away other people's, swallow other governments, other countries, and keep war going, keep the Anunnaki who have the hidden hand in charge. And that's what governments do. And that's the function of governance as an institution. That's quite different than governance, which is how people get along, which does not imply that there has to be a hierarchy. You can have an ad hoc that is, as the situation requires, leadership. And so if you're building a road, you have engineers in a position rather than medical doctors. And if you're taking out an appendix, you don't use the engineers.
Right, and it's kind of just a little aside, and we'll get into the book. When you were a young anthropologist, you were in Fiji and Tonga.
Yes.
And you were studying tribal cultures. Were they pretty tribal in those days?
No, they weren't tribal at all.
Okay.
They are modern people with outboard motors and part of the copra trade and brought to Mara, they had a Fiji when I was there, had an MA from the London School of Economics. And no way are Fijians or Tongans tribal people.
Well, we're talking about back in the 50s. I guess I misunderstood. You were studying how they, I forget what your dissertation was on, how the cultures, I don't know. I forget now. It's been too many years since we talked about it.
The Fiji and Tonga are modern countries with modern educated people.
Okay, so anyway, that was an aside. I just thought there might be an example.
They have history, of course.
Of how they're...
Many ancient societies and societies that are truly non-technological in recent times were often acephalous. That is, there isn't anybody at the head of things. Often there was an informal group of elders called the gerontocracy that ran things. Sometimes, like among the Inuit, the Eskimo, people just had summer congregations where they got together, winter congregations where they got together in a good place and spread out in the summer. And you don't have to have a boss telling you what to do. When people can talk, they reach consensus. In some societies, that's the way they work. In other societies, like in the Cherokee, before Andy Jackson, killed them off and sent the survivors to Oklahoma, what the Cherokee had is that they had the women were in charge during the agricultural season in Georgia, and during the summer, the head hunter guys were in charge when they went after buffalo. So that's a system called transhumance. We have different social organization in different places. There are a number of different things, and what happens particularly among the Native Americans is they never lost touch with Earth in the way that the technological societies around them have.
Great. So anyway, there's lots of ways of doing our societal structures where we can meet the needs of the people and build things like roads and schools and expand and grow as a culture. And I guess one last thing, and we'll go to the book, is was that like the Ubuntu culture, the contributionism that Michael Tellinger talks about?
What's that you're referring to?
These cultures that I don't know what I'm saying. I have no idea.
You mean the acephalous societies?
Yes, I was acephalous. Okay.
Not necessarily. Sometimes, for example, among the Telenzi of what's modern Ghana, you have different structures at different times. So during the part of the year, the people just live in small compounds, say with a guy and his brother, and each of them have multiple wives, and they usually had sororal polygyny, so they had more sisters. You'd marry two sisters because they like each other's company and so forth. So you'd live in this small group, and you'd make your beer and all that stuff. And then as winter came in, you start having groups with your cousins, and then your uncles, and then your grandfather and your great-grandfather, and so you have your whole lineage, people with whom, among the Telenzi, you were related through men. And then they have a big corroboree where all of the clans get together, and they have a huge party, and they feel their oneness with the tribe. So at different times of the year, there were different parts of the society, and their society was based on kinship, and who's closer to the founder of this and that. And so whenever you have that, and it's many generations back, you can always have an argument about who is the older brother and who is the younger brother. The Hawaiians to this day still argue about that sort of stuff. Among the Hawaiians, they had a redistributive system where a chief, they had ambilineal kinship, so you could stay with either your mother's or your father's people. And so in ordinary Hawaiians, in the days of the Marquesas, before the Tahitians arrived particularly, but even after the Tahitian chiefs were here, everybody would go gather whatever they got. Some people would get some stuff from the ocean. Some people would get it from the shoreline. Some would get it from the tops of the mountains. And they bring it all to the chief. The chief didn't consume it all. He just put it in different piles, and they had a big party. And he said, now go bring this package to Makasiali's lineage. And he knew that they had 20 people, so he had a big one. And bring this one over to Isikali's lineage. And he knew that was a small one, so they had a small bunch. So he was a redistributive head. And so even though he was a head, he didn't have arbitrary authority. And that was the same thing I witnessed in Fiji, where Ratu Mara, this guy with an MA from the London School of Economics, who was also prime minister, was the head of all the lineages in eastern Fiji and Laos. And he did that same thing. He was a redistributive guy. And if a person wasn't fair in the redistribution, well, people would stop giving him shit. And they'd move to the next, to their mother's people instead of staying with their father's people or whatever it was. And pretty soon the guy was a chief of nothing because he didn't have anybody to do nothing. And that's the function that you can see that's what can bring down any society. It's nullity. You stop participating in the institution and it falls apart. And so, you stop, playing your trump cards and you don't have that card game anymore.
Right. So we're going to look at the joys of psychopathocracy, why criminality is essential to effective modern government, our rebirth in the wake of their destruction of our world. And it's by Greg, is that Catan or Caton? Caton. And Dr. Lessin's going to start us off here. And he read the book and I didn't, so I'm going to do the best I can. But
okay, so Caton says that government is necessarily evil. Nothing can reform it. As long as you have government, he thinks it's always going to be evil. When a government fails to manifest its evil genes, he says, then it'll fall prey to one that does. All these governments try to put forth what he calls the benign common narrative. The benign common narrative is a generally held, lovably skewed belief that people accept about themselves, the collective principles and culture. America's right, it's the best, that kind of thing. However, government is sculpted to hide its maliciousness. Governments, says Caton, are parasitic to the masses they rule. The resources they must secure to support their infrastructure and operations take more from the general public than they give back. The government aligns with the elite. It aligns with the people with money, or it aligns with the people that have lots of resources. And they use all that to secretly enslave financially the majority who are not so resource rich.
Just you read it, because I haven't read this. So let's just, and then we'll do some commentary on it, okay?
Okay. So the people, Caton says, who run the International Monetary Fund, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. There's no room for me, honey.
Just talk in this direction, you're fine.
And the Bilderbergers, they see the world as their personal fiefdom. They openly support the criminal activities of governments and their associated multinational partners. The people that run things partner with government, and they provide them with financial support. They benefit from favors, contracts, kickbacks, political hits, suppression of competition, freedom from prosecution, and they get laws that support their agenda, favorable tax treatment, special loopholes, special considerations as regard trade and tariffs, and they get preferable public relations treatment and better media coverage. So these are the people that are really behind the scenes, and they're the ones that run the governments, says Caton. The government engineers problems, and then it acts surprised that the crisis is facing them. But of course, it's made its own crisis. And of course, they planned for this crisis, just like they did before the taking down the Twin Towers, where they had the Patriot Act all ready to go and the troops ready to roll and all that stuff. And so they already have the solution of their own design. It was fully planned before the initial problem was ever executed. It's a prelude to military confrontation. For example, the United States agents sunk the USS Maine in Havana. That started the Spanish-American War, gave an excuse to beat the Spanish. U.S. agents engineered the sinking of the Lusitania, which gave America the excuse to enter world on the Allies' side. They engineered the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which gave LBJ the excuse to intervene in Vietnam's civil war. They withheld intelligence on the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt told the Secretary of the Navy, who had said, look, the Japanese are coming toward Pearl Harbor. I want to put this fleet in a defensive position. And Roosevelt said, no, I need a lot of casualties so that I can declare war on Japan, and then Germany will declare war on us, and then we can save England before it's too late from the Nazis. So all the things that casus belli, as they're caused, are planned well far in advance. So that's some of the main points that Cotton makes. Let me just see. Here's a few more that he has. He says that since 9/11, we've been tested by more and more ridiculous stories about how things happen. Like jet fuel brought down all those buildings, including the 7 where there was no jet fuel and so forth. And what's happening is the leaders are funneling trillions to their criminal bankster buddies. JFK's assassination is another one like that. It was completely fabricated. One of the causes, Caton thinks, was JFK's attempt to neuter the Federal Reserve Bank. That made him was one of the things that made him an assassination target. Many Americans were willing to accept the aversion. They were cowed into submission for fear of appearing to be a conspiracy theorist. That's what they call someone who tells the truth these days. 50% of American people actually believe the bogus explanation of how Kennedy was shot. And funny, one of the commissioners that said, this was this Lee Oswald, blah, blah, acting alone, was Gerald Ford, who later became president. They also put the Illuminati, and the people that are really running things, put the on Ross Perot, who looked like he was way ahead to win the election. And some of George Bush's seniors, CIA pals, said, we're going to off your family unless you drop out. So he dropped out. The CIA brought over all the Nazis to the military-industrial complex after we really lost the war against the Germans in the Battle of the Weddell Sea in 1947, which you probably don't hear about in the mainland, but on Revolution Radio, you probably know about it. The CIA gets over $600 billion a year on its cocaine and heroin operations. That's why it likes Vietnam and why it destabilized El Salvador and Santo Domingo. And the biggest test, Caton says, was the gullibility testing of the American people in 9/11. The radical Muslims had nothing to do with the indiscriminate bombing of women and children in Arab countries. We did that, and we attacked Afghanistan, he says, to get the Afghan poppies. Else we can steal. So that's some of what Caton is saying, and I find a lot of truth in it. And I think that especially the younger generation, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others are really getting the real picture and are saying, let's go beyond the benign common narrative and talk about what's really going on, and let's see if we can do something where we make government for the people and not for the elite that are running the people who they put in government. It's interesting. It's all coming to a head now, and the Anunnaki type dominator consciousness versus the progressives, more basically partnership consciousness.
Right, but they play the donkey elephant game. It doesn't matter who's on what side, when, where, and how, because they all get involved in this system of creating this problem, reaction, solution to keep the government top dog and in control at all times, And as the years go by, we get kind of dummied down and more fearful and unable to figure out. And now we're in a society where basically everybody has PTSD and can't even think straight. And like in Pennsylvania, my sister says that every day they lose 10 to 20 young people, mostly young people, and they're dying of heroin overdoses. And this is a pretty conservative culture that was when I was growing up, they're very religious, and now it's nothing for my cousin who was an evangelistic religion. Her only child, a boy, is now dead from a heroin overdose, and that would have been something never thought of before.
Well, if you really look at what's happening here, what happened is that the drug companies and the insurance companies were pushing for every little pain that you got. Don't feel the pain. Take these opioids, and they had basically doctors became opioid sales people, and they got a percentage on how many people they addicted and so forth. And then when people realized, oh my gosh, this is killing people, and they started monitoring how much opioids people could take, the prescription opioids, then people started doing heroin, which is a lot more dangerous because that's all they could afford, or even crystal meth, which is even worse. And so that this whole crisis was manufactured by the fact that we, instead of just having effective medicines or effective treatment, marijuana and cannabinoids can cure cancer. It's the guy that wrote the book, Greg Caton, was put in jail for saying that. You can't say it cures things. The AMA didn't give you your approval. And so...
That's a quote. Yes. So anyway, but this all ties back to the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki never left, and this has been going on all along. This control, manipulation, domination of humanity to keep us unconscious, to keep us, enslaved. So we're basically all corporate economic slaves, and it's a system that is no longer working for the average person who can barely, keep food on the table. I was looking at our back end of our checking account, and it's like, oh my God, look at the cost of food. And it's really gone up. I don't know what's going on in the mainland, but I've just noticed, it's really gone up here in Hawaii because it's just costing more and more to even feed yourself. And we don't eat, the rich, right? We just say normal food, and we don't eat out. We can't afford to eat out and all that stuff. So things are bad. Problem, reaction, solution. So come back over here, honey, because I didn't get to read the whole book. And where do we want to go? We have another about 25 minutes to this show. How can you tie the modern era back to the Anunnaki? Because one of the things that we're doing in our research is it's same culture. It's been going on since the beginning of time. It's extraterrestrial. We have the tie-ins with the Anunnaki. Alexander the Great is a known character in our normal mainstream history, Alexander the Great, and he was an Anunnaki. So we're tying it in with Romulus and Remus. They were the children of Inanna, right? No, not Inanna. Who were Romulus and Remus?
Romulus and Remus were from Latinium. They were not. I know that you're thinking.
Oh, Aeneid's children, right? Aeneid was the son of Inanna, right?
Aeneas landed in Latinium and married into that royal house.
Right.
And Romulus and Remus are down the line or founded Rome.
And they founded Rome, yeah. So anyway, go ahead. Your turn.
Okay. Well, you asked me what can be done about this, and is to realize that the problem is what we call dualistic thinking. That is, our brains separate things into two sides, and we identify with one and disidentify with the other. But really, we're part of everything. And so each one of us, if we can realize it, can be both proud and humble, can be great and and small, can be sloppy and neat, can be sometimes carefree and sometimes very controlled, can be in your head and intellectual, and other times in your heart and emotional. And it's when you become identified with one, and our culture has come to be identified with the intellect so much that it suppresses the heart, the empathetic. And what a person does is they become more mature and able to realize that they are both, they care for other people, and they are also can be selfish. You can be selfish and you can be generous. You're not one or the other, but you can, once you learn how to meditate and go into pure awareness and witness yourself, you realize that what you react to negatively in other people, or you admire in other people, is really just part of you that you're not recognizing, and that the other people's behavior bugs you or somehow destabilizes you because you haven't recognized that in yourself. Once you realize, oh yeah, there's a part of me that's acquisitive as well as a part of me that likes to give, then you're not upset by somebody else's acquisitiveness, or if you're a very identified with the other with acquisitiveness, greed. I love being greedy. A lot of people will tell you. That means you've disidentified with the carefree part that likes to share. But we're all of it, and that's all you got to do is dig it, and you're not alienated from anybody.
Right. So they're saying that we have most things are funneled to our intellect, our brain, because we become identified with what we think, and we're not really heart-centered in identifying with what we...
Many people are like that, but one of the things we anthropologists have found that in every culture, no matter how they think of people symbolize things, people that reflect on their existence, either with entheogens or other means, come to the conclusion that the universe is like it is, that there's a sense of everything is inchoate, is there in the metacosmic void, so to speak, and it's all everything is part of everything else. And then there's a spirit of playfulness known as lila, which causes dichotomies, and the whole thing that you get when you get a dichotomy, you have two poles of what's called dimension, and the dimensions are things along which you can play. For example, your engineering versus your social worker side, that kind of thing. Everybody has all of it. And it's a matter of letting yourself realize that. And then there's nobody that's alien. There's nothing in the human condition, says Goethe, which is alien to any of us. And once you dig that, you're at peace. And then when you're at peace, you can enjoy what's happening right here, right now, every second, without being attached to the imagined future or the dead past.
Right. So the original idea, the concept is that we came down from non-physical, higher level consciousness, soul level, into this, the grand polarity game, which was like dark, good, bad, evil, goodness. And so that is our continuum upon which we play out life, existence, the human plane. And so we get to be characters in play. One time we incarnate, we might be, the bad person and the evil character in a play. And then the next time, or even in a single lifetime, we are all the above. We experience times when we're like dark, good, evil, kind, mean, and everything.
Well, it's like what we say. It's the principle of the animus mundi. That is, right now you're listening to me, and whatever's happening as you listen to my voice is reminiscent of something that happened in your childhood when you were listening to somebody. And it's reminiscent of some movies you watched and some books you read and some dreams you had. In other words, and it's some past life images that you had had if you were to regress to an earlier time and place when you were wearing another body. You would have some experiences that are just like the experience you're having right now listening to me. That's why 4 or 5 people can say, I was Abraham Lincoln, and none of them are lying. They're just accessing different parts of the Akashic records that are in all of us in our singularities, which means that it's just everything has a resonance within you here and now. And so once you realize that, you can come to peace with everything.
Right, so you see the divine perfection of everything, and that we create these experiences, so we have a series of experiences, something to do. Right?
So it's not just that we created the experiences, because that's a causal sequence. If you go beyond causal sequence, you see the experience causes us to create it too. They're simultaneous. In the Two-Slit Experiment, we find that when electrons are turned into matter, into protons, it not only changes the future, it also changes the past when they set cameras up in front of the windows. And so everything's always co-created. Everything's in relationship. Everything's related to everything else. This is a fractal holographic universe where there's a resonance in every being with every being and every non-being too. You have to be able to transcend dualism but still have it. You have to be able to walk the material path with the spiritual heart. In other words, you don't lose your everyday self just because you have a spiritual experience. However, the spiritual experience does do something different. It changes your awareness so that when you go into fair witness and you just witness yourself, you've got the wisdom. So that's why having real experiences of a spiritual nature, although you can't stay there, you still have to come back and carry water and chop wood, so to speak. But that awareness stays with you. And when you really need it, you remember. And that's what life is about, remembering and forgetting. And remembering and forgetting. Sometimes we get so into the games we play, we forget who we really are, to remember that love is the way to remember.
Right, and this whole way of describing it really proves that we are one. At the highest level of existence, we are one, and that we come into this experience in order to experience duality. It's just a concept. And
we're also one in kinship too, very, very much so. For example, let's take how the Jews and the Arabs have been fighting, all that stuff. But Abraham was the father of Ishmael, the father of the Arab race, and also of his own son, Isaac, who is the father of the Hebrew race. And so we're brothers, we're cousins. It's dumb to kill each other.
Right, so we've forgotten who we are. Now, we're going back to the source. So the origins of the Jewish and the Muslim cultures was from
Abraham.
And Abraham was
Yahweh's Enlil's Toady.
And so he was an Anunnaki, right?
Abraham was a mixed a person. His father was Terah, who was part of Nanar's staff, and Enlil, Yahweh had sent Terah to Nanar's place to make sure that he followed the rules and so forth. And Abraham was educated to be the best general of the day, and he had this great cavalry and so forth. And when Yahweh bombed the Salt Sea and Sinai, he got Abraham and his and Lot, his nephew, out in time, and guided them out of the radioactive area. And then he couldn't tell his human beings from the other human beings, so he had Abraham and his men circumcise themselves so their phalluses would be like the Anunnakis. The Anunnaki lack foreskins. And Abraham's wife, Sarah, was old and she couldn't bear, and he married a secondary wife. Her name was Hagar. She was an Egyptian princess, and with Sarai, his wife's approval, and they had Isaac. Ishmael, and Ishmael was raised to be king of Canaan. However, Yahweh didn't like this. He wanted the bloodline that was closer to his, and he said, put him out in the desert, let him die, I'm going to make it so that I know how to, we Anunnaki know how to make people pregnant. We'll fix Sarah so you can have a baby with her too. And so Abraham said, put them out in the desert, but it's my wife and my kid. Do it or you're dead. Okay, boss. You know, like Dylan had a thing called Route 66 that really sums it up well. Where you want this killing done? Route 61. I mean, don't do it on the wrong route. But anyway, but then he does. Yahweh does the same trip with the next kid. So the next kid is the son that this is the one that's going to start the lineage he wants. And so he takes the second son that he finally has with Sarah and takes Isaac takes Isaac out in the desert. And God said, well, go ahead. You're gonna make a little fire and stuff. And Isaac's a grown-up kid. Dad, are you really going to kill me? Listen, son, God says I got to do it or else I'm dead when next time he sees me. Okay, Dad, I'm scared, but I love you so much. Go ahead and kill me. And then last minute, Yahweh sends one of his dudes down and say, you don't have to do it. It was just testing you. Well, you know, any person that feels their heart ain't going to kill their kid just because some big guns tells you to do it. So, you know, it's so obvious that Yahweh is not God. He's just a murderous dude. But we know that he's really come a long ways, and he's a peaceful dude now. He's sorry for a lot of the stuff he did. Is what he told. So
the Anunnaki interacting with the humans have learned as well. So it was a two-way street, and the Anunnaki needed the human species as much as it's just a two-way street. We needed them; we wouldn't exist if it weren't for them. But we actually saved them, and they were going to go extinct. They were just losing viability and becoming sterile. So this created we are their children. So we're all related to this extraterrestrial species that came from Nibiru, and so this is a intergalactic society right now we have going on, and we're only given this small piece of the puzzle. It was interesting the other day. I don't know if you've seen the logo for the new space branch of the military, and it's ripped off directly from Star Trek. I'll have to post it on my site. This symbol, they have the Star Trek symbol from the badge, and they're using it for the new Space Command logo. I'll put that up. I saw that first thing this morning when I woke up. It's like, can't you think of something other than Star Trek? But that might be a key that Roddenberry really was onto something, and they're trying to bring it out. So one of the stories I heard was they're going to bring out that there is this secret space program, and we've been developing this all along, and so that might be a way we go from here to there and get all the technologies. I mean, we had it originally. The Anunnaki had it. They've been coming here 450,000 years. They learned along the way. They came with rocket technology in the beginning, and now they have warp capabilities and all this stuff. So we've seen them grow and evolve. Now let's go back. We only have about 10 minutes left, and talk about what did the Anunnaki believe. So they ended up creating all these religions. At first they were, I don't think they intended it. What are these people doing? They're worshiping us, or they're fawning all over us. They liked it. And now that seems to be the system that they are perpetuating in order to keep controlling and manipulating the human species. But they, too, believed in the creator of all. Tell us a bit more about that, Doctor. What is this creator of all?
I'm not. I don't know any more than Lama's wife, the queen, said, "Pray to the creator of all." When you say stuff like that, it sounds like it could be she's anthropomorphizing, seeing the creator as a person, but. Like the guys, like MMK says in Far Pavilions, I worship you, God, oh God, in this mountain because you're so immense I can't conceive of anything bigger than this mountain. So I'm going to pretend that you're in the mountain, and I worship the mountain, but I'm not worshiping the mountain. I'm worshiping all of it. And I think that's what sophisticated people ultimately wind up doing. They understand.
So what the Anunnaki discovered through all the things that unfolded was that there was a higher species than the Anunnaki, and we're getting feedback, called the Galzu. And the Galzu, I don't know what the species was called, but there was a representative that his name was Galzu, and he told Nimma that he was her classmate, and she didn't remember having a classmate named Galzu. But after Noah's flood, Galzu revealed, or it became clear that the Galzu person was intervening in their decision to go back to Nibiru. The Enki, Enlil, and Nimma and the kids, they wanted to go back to Nibiru, but they were told that if they left the environment of the earth, since they had been there so long, that they would perish. And so they stayed on Earth, and they saw that the flood was going to happen, right? And so they had just enough ships to get them out into space, and they were circling around the Earth. They were looking down. They saw all they grew to love us. We were their children. They had personal relationships with us, but they couldn't take all of humanity. Originally, we thought that everybody perished, and that's the story of the flood. But there were some that were probably went underground or high into the Andes. Right? There were certain parts that stayed above the waterline. And we're getting strange feedback. But anyway, so we realized that they didn't want us to perish. That this is a species that was considered illegal. Human beings are a species that was considered illegal by the Federation. Even the ancient Sumerians has this concept of a federation, a connected group of planets where the culture was all interacted with each other and traded. So what would you like to say about that?
From my perspective, the Galzu were representative of the Galactic Federation, which after the Lyrans fled the Dracos, Maldek, and the Dracos blew up Maldek, which was between Jupiter and Mars, and ultimately the Federation revived and the Anunnaki had belonged to the Pleiadian Unity Kingdom before they came to Nibiru, which was a planet that spun off after Sirius C went nova and shot Nibiru into our solar system, where it would have an elongated orbit and pass through every 3,600 years or so. The Federation mounted an attack on the Dracos. They landed the Atlantis, which was between North America, continent between North America and Northern Europe, and Lemuria, which was a continent between. Basically in the Pacific. Hawaii was one of its peaks, and so were the other Hawaiian islands, but the Philippines and Japan and all that were part of Lemuria. And the Dracos occupied a million years before they came to the surface of Venus. They built 7 domed cities. They placed the moon in its position, and from the moon they settled in Lemuria. The Federation, in the meantime, took the Atlanteans, it took the Maldekans, who had been underground with the Martians, and they landed in the Gobi Desert. And the whole fleet of the Martians attacked the Dracos on Venus, drove them off of the moon, drove them underground on the Earth, and the war went on until the Council of Hatona forced them to have a peace treaty. And that made the proto-humans, of which Homo erectus was the one that the Anunnaki ultimately chose as the genetic donor for the Earthlings that we became, for the first Adam.
So it seems like, we have about 4 minutes. So from what we gathered from our research and these thousands of shows we've done now, and other people and talking and correlating all the information, that the first duality was the Dracos and the
Lyrans.
Lyrans. So the Lyrans, we are the humanoid. We look like the Lyrans, but also Lyran is cat, lion. So there's some kind of, we have this strong relationship with cats, and so that's why we have cats. Because beings can be developed, and they can be gigantic like a dragon, but down to, the same reptilian can be a Draco in the middle, and they could be
a
gecko. So we have geckos all over here in Maui. And so there are apparently cats that are bipedal with opposing fingers, and they're able to communicate, and dogs, and every variation on the theme. But the original polarity was the Lyrans and the Dracos. And so, and we have their DNA, both on this humanoid form, right now here in 2020. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, not quite. What happened is in the Council of Etona, they said all the races and that are species that are interested in Earth are to make a proto-human Draco combination, and 12 humanoid groups and one Draco reptilian group contributed to our genetics. And the Draco group contributed our brain stem, which is our fight or flight ability to survive on this tough environment that we have here, and that's part of every one of us. And you may not think you have a killer inside, but when the pit bull jumps at your throat, you'll find out that you do.
Right. So we all have the ability to preserve self-preservation, and yet we have to balance out and not end up killing those we love. So we're almost at the end of our show. We have a brand new book out called about Anunnaki Evolution of the Gods, and we're working on, I guess, Anunnaki Religions of the Gods, something like that. But go ahead. Tell them a little bit about Evolution of Gods, available now on, Amazon.
Yeah, we look at all the different traditions, and we see what's there. And I can tell you, no matter what the tradition, there's always people in that tradition that develop spiritual experiences and pure awareness and are no longer bound by rules or a hierarchy or anything of this sort, but know source directly. And the secret is to really just be totally here now. You have everything you need to enjoy your here and now. Just concentrate on doing. When are you going to become the one you always wanted to be? Don't let yourself be sorry you lived your life in vain. Just give your life what you've got. The more you give, the more you gain.
And we have two major websites, enkispeaks.com, ENKISPEAKS.com, and aquarianradio.com. Please check those out. The Aquarian Radio archive of most of the shows we've done for the past 15 years. Thank you so much. Love and blessings, and
aloha.